Before I do start this video, make sure to use my TCG Player affiliate down below if you're looking for any of these singles that I talk about today. Also, this channel is sponsored by Arcane Fortress. If you're looking for the best deck boxes around, make sure to use my link down below in the description to check them out. One other way you can support the channel is by becoming a patron. There are some great benefits of being a patron to the channel, such as giveaways, deck advice, and more when you do join. Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Devin coming back at you with another video today on PubStomp MTG, and in this video today, I'll be discussing one of the 4 precon decks that are coming out for Outlaws of Thunder Junction. And today I will be focusing on Grand Larceny. This is a Sultai colored combination commander deck, and honestly it looks super cool. This is the one I'm probably most anticipating because based off of the art, I'm a big art guy, and when I saw Gonti on that front facing art, I knew immediately that I was going to like this one the most out of all of them. And plus I have been wanting to build a Sultai commander deck for quite a while, and I feel like this fits the bill perfectly. So if you haven't seen some of my precon upgrade videos, usually I will dive into the commander, talk about some of the new cards, then later on discuss some of the reprints of the deck, mainly so that you can get an idea of what's in the deck before upgrading it. Then of course later on the last part of the video, I'll go over about 10 upgrades you can put into the deck so that you can really fine tune the deck to your liking. Of course this is going to be a theft deck. I will say something about theft decks, a lot of people find it a little salty that you steal their stuff. However, the secondary commander is a great option if you don't want to go into that full theft option. So with that said, let's get right into it. So first of all, let's read into the commanders of the deck so that you can get an idea which one you may want to choose from, because I'm not necessarily going to upgrade with one or the other in mind, but I am going to focus on the commander specifically and which playstyle you want to go with, because both of them definitely do have different playstyles. So first of all, we do have Gonti Canny Inquisitor. Sorry, I had to pull up the worst cowboy accent. You can let me know down below in the comments if you don't want to hear that in future videos. I just wanted to try it out for this one specifically. But this one does read 2 black, green, and a blue legendary creature, Aetherborn Rogue. Spells you cast but don't own cost 1 less to cast. Also, whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, look at the top card of that player's library, then exile it face down. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled, and mana of any kind can be spent to cast it. So in a way, it's very similar to the first version of Gonti in the fact that you're stealing cards. But first of all, before I even dive into how good it is, I just have to say, this art looks breathtaking. Honestly, one of my favorite arts. I know I keep saying that about every set, but seriously, they made Gonti look like an absolute menace, and I'm all for it. So I will say what's very nice about this commander, it does provide a very straightforward game plan. You're basically going in with a bunch of evasive creatures so that you can swing in, connect, steal some opponent's cards, and then cast them for a reduced cost with Gonti. And what's nice is since you do have 3 different opponents, you can swing with 3 evasive creatures, 1 at each of them, so that you can steal 3 cards from the top of their library. So this could be a very sweet and salt-reducing commander, but let's focus on the other one with Felix 5 Foots. This one with the same mana cost of 2 black, green, and a blue. It's a legendary creature, Ooze Rogue, does have Menace and Ward 2. If a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So they basically did another Panharmonicon style ability, but based off of combat triggers. In a weird way, this kind of reminds me of Isshin 2 Heaven Does 1, mainly because of that Panharmonicon ability. It'll affect any permanent triggering. So if you have like a Coastal Piracy and you swing in with a creature, you'll draw 2 cards instead of 1 card, mainly because you are triggering any permanent you do have on the battlefield. To me, you already kind of know how I feel about Panharmonicon effects. I feel like there probably is a little bit too much of them in especially Commander right now. A lot of people like doing their doubling effects. So this is a very combat oriented deck, and weirdly enough, there's a lot of ninjutsu strategies, which does make sense because you want to go in with evasive creatures. Besides the point, I wish Felix 5 Foots had some type of ability to deal with his 5 Foots. I wish it was like kicker times 5 maybe swinging in with all of his foots at one person would be fun to see. Either way, you do have 2 great options in the command zone that you can choose from, either with Gonti or Felix. Both of them provide a great strategy, basically focusing on a combat oriented deck. So following that, I do want to focus on the new cards of the deck. There's a lot of fun and exciting ones. There's going to be 8 in total if you're not including the commanders. So I do want to first mention a couple fun ones that are pretty interesting, mainly because, well, you'll see why, with Thieving Varmint and also Towering Winery Winder. Both of these technically provide mana for us. Thieving Marmot is a great mana dork for us. We could pay 1 life, add 2 mana of any one color to spend it only on spells you don't own. Also, it does have Death Touch and Lifelink, so it's a great blocker on the battlefield. And with Tower Winder, it's basically just going to search your library for a command tower and put it into your hand. Unfortunately, the downside of this, though, if you already have a command tower on the battlefield, this is basically useless. I mean, it is a Death Touch body with reach, so who knows? Tower Winder may actually be a pretty good staple for a lot of decks. It's just, for me personally, if you have a command tower on the battlefield, it basically just doesn't really work well. But I do want to switch my focus to another great card that's an equipment with Dream Thief's Bandana. So for 2, that's an artifact equipment. Whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, look at the top card of their library, then exile it face down. For as long as it remains exiled, you may play a mana of any type can be spent to cast that spell, and it does have an equip 1. I personally wish there was a little bit more to add to this card, maybe like a ward 2, just to give the creature a little bit of protection, because outside of that, it's another okay card. I mean, it could be very good in this deck, but I don't really see it seeing play outside of this kind of deck specifically. Following that, there's a pretty good play from exile, or really play from anywhere other than your hand card with Savvy Trader. This is going to be a great include in many of those decks like Faldorn. So for 3 and a green, whenever it does enter the battlefield, exile target permanent card from your graveyard. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled, and spells you cast from anywhere other than your hand cost 1 less, so whether you're stealing those cards or if you're playing from exile or any other way. For 1, this is a cost reducer. We already have Gonti being a cost reducer in the command zone, so we can reduce our spells by 2. That by itself is wonderful. And we could even get a permanent card from your graveyard into exile that we could play later on, even if it's a land, mainly because it does have that ruling you may play that card. So there's the difference between casting and playing. You could play a land, but you can't cast a land. So this over time is going to be a great value engine, especially if you have a lot of flicker abilities. Up next, there are some more theft cards that I do want to highlight, like Arcane Heist and Smirking Spelljacker. Even though it's 4 mana, Arcane Heist can be pretty powerful because you could just grab anybody's instant or sorcery from their graveyard and then play it without paying its mana cost. That's going to be pretty insane depending on what kind of instant or sorcery spells are in your opponent's graveyard. You could either really just ramp out if somebody has a rampant growth, or if somebody has a bigger and splashier spell, you could take advantage of that too. And honestly, the best part about this spell is the fact that it does have a cipher cost. So basically, when you cipher it onto a creature and this creature deals combat damage to a player, you may copy the encoded card and you may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. So you can repeat this as many times as you'd like, as long as you swing in and deal combat damage with that creature. And of course, with a lot of hard to block creatures in the deck, this is going to be absolutely beautiful to play. And with Smirking Spelljacker, it does have that great ability, Flash and Flying. Unfortunately, it is 5 mana, but it does have a very powerful ability. When it enters the battlefield, exile target spell an opponent controls. So right then and there, it is a great counter spell, basically exiling any target spell that an opponent controls when it's on the stack. And it does have the other ability, if it does attack, if a card is exiled with it, you may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost. So don't be fooled by that mana cost, because this could save you the game and also turn it in your favor depending on what kind of spell you do steal. Speaking of high cost spells, I do want to mention Heartless Conscription. This is pretty incredible, especially for being a board wipe. I know it is 8 mana, and I know that does seem like a lot, but trust me, the ability is crazy. It has the ability to exile all creatures for each card exiled this way. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled, and mana of any type can be spent to cast that spell. Exile Heartless Conscription. I believe there's not that many black board wipes that do a mass exile. I know a lot of them will do something like a Toxic Deluge where they give -X/-X, or they destroy all creatures. And again, there is some that exile all creatures or have some kind of condition like that, but this is just straight up exile all creatures. And later on, you can cast all creatures exiled with Heartless Conscription. Yeah, this is going to be absolutely nuts and potentially a game winner in the deck. So this is probably one of the best cards you can be playing in the deck. I know the mana cost seems like a lot, but you are in green, you could ramp into it. But I do want to move on to the last new card in the deck, and that's going to be Soul Reaver. I'm not going to try to pronounce that first part of the name because I get roasted in the comments enough for mispronouncing things. The main reason why I do like this is it's pretty good value engine, but I do love the art. It looks absolutely wicked, like the soul coming out of that man's body off of that Soul Reaver, taking it away. But it does have some pretty decent stats. So for 5 and a black, it does have Ninjutsu 3 and a black. So really, you're most likely going to be paying this for 4 mana. But it does have a really powerful ability whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player. So let's stop right there. If you do swing at 3 different players with 3 different creatures, you're going to get this effect times 3. So when you do deal that damage, you will create a treasure token and manifest the top card of that player's library. So potentially we can make 3 treasure tokens and manifest 3 cards onto our battlefield. So that by itself seems pretty powerful, and we could definitely manifest a lot of different things so that we could get overwhelming value from our opponent's library. So I absolutely love what this card's doing. doing. It's going to be a great fit in the deck, of course, because you're going in that stealing theme, and you are making treasure to basically cast a lot of the spells that you are casting from exile from your opponent's library. So with all that said, let's dive into the list and talk about some of the great reprints in the deck. Okay, so I'm on NTG Goldfish. This is just a great website just to check out the list and talking about some of the cards that are in there. There's a lot of decent reprints. I will say a lot of these reprints have been reprinted before, and so that's why this doesn't really demand a high price tag compared to your normal decks that you would see. I think the previous sets had like $120 price tags for at least a single individual value. I know this is around $86, which is pretty decent for a $40 or $50 precon deck. And so the first thing I do want to discuss is the lands, mainly because the lands are honestly a lot better than most precons. Of course, a lot of the decks in this set have a lot of the fast lands like Darklick Shores. I want to say some of the other ones have like 2 or maybe even 3. I haven't looked at all the lists completely yet. This is the first one I'm making a deck video out of. But there's also some other great ones that I want to point out, like the check lands like Drowned Catacomb, checking if you have a swamp or an island in play so that could enter the battlefield untapped. Basically the pain lands where you could deal 1 damage to yourself just to make a color of mana that you do need. So there's a lot of great reprints in this. There's also the Filter lands, Twilight Mire, and I want to say, where's the other Simic one? Flooded Grove. So again, so many good reprints in this. I absolutely think it's one of the better, as far as everything goes, the better lands that we do see in precons. And of course, the biggest thing that really shocked me about this deck while looking at it was the fact there's a lot of ninjutsu synergy. Of course, we do have a lot of unblockable creatures, mainly so that we could swing in, get some triggers with Gonti to steal some cards. And if we wanted to, we could absolutely take advantage of ninjutsu cards like Nashi, Moon Sage's Scion. And so again, there's a lot of mix between unblockable creatures and ninjutsu creatures. There's also creatures in between that really help the game plan. For example, Oron Frostfang and also Edric, Spymaster of Trest. These both have that ability to, whenever a creature you control deals damage to a player, you draw a card. Edric is a little different, where whenever a creature damages one of your opponents, so your opponents can't get a card draw too. So that's a little bit more of a downside compared to Oron Frostfang. I do like this a little bit more because of your attacking creatures will have Death Touch. Because of Death Touch, not a lot of people may want to block into it, so you can swing in, maybe be uncontested, get some triggers with Gonti. Mind's Dilation is also a pretty crazy reprint. This one is a really fantastic card, especially if you get it on the battlefield, because whenever they're casting their spells, you could just cast something from their library without paying their mana cost, so it's going to be really powerful that way. But again, a lot of those like $1 to $5 reprints, there's not really a big giant reprint that's like standing out compared to the rest, unless you're talking about Mind's Dilation. I feel like maybe there might be a lot of value in the cards that they did make. For example, the Soul Reaver looks absolutely fantastic. I am actually definitely going to be playing that for sure in this deck. So now that I've talked about cards that are in the deck, now let's focus on cards that I would switch in. So now that I've talked about the new cards and also the reprints, I do want to focus on upgrades because this is an upgrade video after all. There's going to be about 10 cards that I will upgrade this deck with. First up is Xanathar Guild Kingpin. This is pretty crazy. At the beginning of your upkeep, choose target opponent. Until end of turn, that player can't cast spells. You may look at the top card of their library at any time, and you may play the top card of their library and may spend mana as low or mana of any color to cast that spell this way. This is just great because, of course, if you do have an enemy on the table that's really getting ahead out of everybody else, you could just take advantage of their library, and I guess you can make an enemy out of them. But who are we kidding? You're playing this deck, most likely you're going to be the enemy on the table because nobody likes their spells being cast by different players. Also, something that I did notice about the deck is the fact that there is a lot of rogues. I didn't really count, but I want to say there's like 10 plus if I'm not mistaken. So why not add to that number and give some support for it? There are some rogues that have great evasion. The ones I do want to focus on is Ghostly Pilferer, Dauthi Voidwalker, and Nighthawk Scavenger. Ghostly Pilferer gives itself unblockable when you discard a card. Also, when it becomes untapped, you may pay 2 and you can draw a card. And whenever an opponent casts a spell from anywhere other than their hand, you draw a card. So this could potentially draw you a decent amount of cards. Of course, you could discard a card so that you can make it unblockable, so when you do swing in, you can trigger Gonti. Also, a Dauthi Voidwalker does have a great abilities, basically having that shadow ability, so it can't be blocked unless it's being blocked by a shadow creature. And it does have a great ley line of the void effect. Plus, later on, you could just cast a spell for free by sacrificing it, and whatever's in exile with a void counter, you could just play without paying its mana cost. And with Nighthawk Scavenger, this is basically a very fun card. I absolutely love this. I played this a lot in Standard. I was one of those filthy rogue players that were playing in Standard when Zendikar Rising was in play. This does have a pretty good ability of flying Death Touch and Lifelink for 3 mana. mana, and depending on how much card types are in your opponent's graveyard, this could get exponentially bigger over time. Let's now put our focus on some flashy rogues like Opposition Agent and Brazen Borrower. I'll tell you what, Opposition Agent is pretty mean, but if you're already playing the villain of the game, you might as well include it. So this could brutally affect a lot of different players, of course, when they're searching their library for either their tutoring or they're just searching for a land. You could take advantage of that, and of course, that's really mean, by the way. However, this could be a nice deterrent for your opponents playing fair, while all the while you're just taking their cards. So of course, Opposition Agent, you love when you have it, but you hate playing against it. Same could be said for Brazen Borrower. It's a nice tempo piece having that instant adventure cost. You just return a target non-land permanent opponent control to its owner's hand. So this is pretty good because of course we want to deal combat damage to our opponents, and if somebody has a big blocker on the battlefield, we could just return it to its hand, so that way we could swing in uncontested potentially. Plus it is pretty evasive itself, having flash and flying, so that you could swing in for 3 damage. You can take some cards from your opponents with Gonti's ability. You're having a good time, right? I do also want to bring your attention to Tiny Bones the Pit Pocket, mainly because for 1 black mana it does have Death Touch being a 1/1 body, and when it deals combat damage to a player, you may cast target non-land permanent card from that player's graveyard, and mana of any type can be spent to cast that spell. That's simple enough. So when we deal combat damage, we could trigger Gonti, and we'll also get that additional trigger with Tiny Bones to basically steal 2 spells. Other cards like Zareth and Anawan, they both have great abilities that support our gameplay, and Zareth has that ability by paying 2 blue and a black. Return an unblocked attacking rogue you control to its owner's hand, so basically like ninjutsu, and then you put it onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. And when it deals combat damage to a player, you may put target permanent card from a player's graveyard and put it onto the battlefield under your control. So this is doing what we want. We want to make sure that we could swing and connect and get some more value out of it. Same could be said for Anawan. It buffs up all our rogues, including our commander, and whenever one or more rogues you control deal combat damage to a player, that player mills a card for each 1 damage dealt to them. If that player mills at least 1 creature card this way, you draw cards. So this is just providing us that little bit of value to draw cards. So let's go back. Let's talk about tutoring with Varragoth Bloodsky Sire. This is going to be absolutely nuts in the deck. This is probably going to be one of the best cards you can be playing for sure. So it might not seem like much, but let's talk about what it does. So for 2 and a black, it does have Death Touch and Boast. 1 and a black, target player searches their library for a card, then shuffle their library and put that card on top of it. So I'll tell you what, this is going to be pretty brutal in the deck, because of course when we do swing it with Varragoth, we could Boast. So instead of tutoring for a card in our library, we could tutor for a card in our opponent's library. If we know a player has a really big spell in their library that we want to cast to win the game, we could easily take advantage of that situation. We could swing in with Varragoth, maybe just to make sure we could swing in with an unblockable creature to that player, and then when we do connect with that player, Gonti will trigger, and with that trigger on the stack, we could activate that Boast trigger with Varragoth, and then search that opponent's library for that big splashy spell, and then cast it later on for 1 less with Gonti's ability. So again, I might be overestimating the hype for Varragoth in this deck, but I feel like it's the perfect fit. However, that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on upgrading the Grand Larceny Precon deck. This one is my favorite out of the bunch, and honestly, I'm super excited to build it myself. But let me know down below in the comments, what are your thoughts and opinions about this upgrade? Are there any things that you would change yourself? I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts, and I just wanted to let you know, basically on this upgrade, I wanted to focus on cards that you can add into the deck. I didn't make a deck list down below in the description this time, mainly because I wanted to focus on cards that you can bring to the table. But again, I would love to hear your thoughts. Is there any cards that I did miss that you feel like are deserving to be in this deck specifically? So with all that said, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And with that out of the way, thank you for stopping by.